Some people might say that Penn State Wrestling's non-conference schedule is easy. That's fine, because there's a reason for that.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Seyko. I am your host of the show, and help me welcome back a very special guest. That is Joe Smeltzer on the other side. Nittany Sports Now beat reporter for football, men's basketball, most importantly for this conversation, wrestling. And let us know your thoughts down in the comments section about this pretty controversial topic. The Penn State wrestling schedule has been released for the 24-25 campaign. And Joe, one of the initial criticisms of this is that the non-conference schedule is weak. Depending on how you look at it, okay, I can understand the reasoning behind it, but Penn State's schedule overall, I think, because of Nebraska, because of Iowa, do you really need to go out of your way to try to schedule all these tough non-conference opponents when your schedule is baked in with them because of the Big Ten Conference?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on as always, Zach. There's two ways to look at it, right? There's the fans' way to look at it, / media's way to look at it, to where, okay, you want to see a team like Iowa State come to Rec Hall or Penn State go to Ames. You want to
Oklahoma State?
Oklahoma State, yeah, that's going to be the big one that's talked about for the next few years, probably. But that's even before David Taylor. That would have been a big one. A team like
right, with or without him.
Yeah, and a team like Missouri would be big. Now, Penn State is wrestling Missouri, but it's not. I don't think a multi-team dual tournament really generates the same excitement, as Penn State wrestling Missouri at Rec Hall or
understandable
Penn State to Missouri. I don't think it's the same thing. There's a bunch of other ones. Cornell, one of those Ivy League schools. Maybe you'd like to see them. But Penn State does have Lehigh, which Lehigh is a pretty solid wrestling program, and that's in-state. It might not generate the same excitement because, it's an in-state school. Penn State's not really going out of its way to do anything special by scheduling it, but Fair. It's still something to look forward to. And then, as you mentioned, the Big Ten schedule, right? Why go crazy in non-conference scheduling? Now, this is transitioning to the way Cael, Sanderson, and Penn State look at things. Is why go nuts in the non-conference schedule when you're going to prove everything you need to prove, and Penn State doesn't need to prove anything anyway, but if it did, it would be able to prove it in the conference season. So there's more than one way to look at it. I think that there might be Penn State obviously has, I would call it, more than justified arrogance because they are the best in the country. If they put a team like a Missouri or Cornell, Oklahoma State, etc. on the dual meet schedule, do they not want to do that because it sends the message that Penn State feels those schools are equal to them when they clearly aren't? That could be a reason as well. Who knows? But yeah, I think the way Penn State treats the non-conference dual season is that it really is a preseason. Have everybody healthy and move on to the Big Ten and dominate. So.
Well, I do like the non-conference opponents that they have. Sure, there's American for the Senior Day dual meet, and that's understandable why that's strategically placed. Yeah. But Lehigh, yes, they should win. They should, and they will. They will win convincingly. But I like that Lehigh's at least ranked. That's one. I mean, you look at the schedule, Joe. 10 top 25 preseason, right? Things can change, and maybe that number increases, maybe it decreases. But according to Intermat, 10 preseason top 25 opponents on this schedule that include a Lehigh, a Wyoming. By proxy, now I know it's not a head-to-head dual meet, and who knows if we're going to see all the starters when they get to wrestle in Missouri at the journeyman duels. But Arkansas Little Rock is preseason number 16. Missouri is in the preseason top 15. So do you really need to go out of your way to schedule an Iowa State when you have a Missouri and Arkansas Little Rock already lined up, and then Ohio State's going to potentially be a top 5 matchup? Nebraska, top 5 matchup. Iowa, 1 versus 2. Penn State versus Iowa. Michigan, I think, they're preseason number 14. That team easily should be within the top 10 by the time Penn State faces them. And Illinois could be in the top 10 by the time they face them. So I agree with Penn State. If they ever were to come out in defense of, hey, you schedule a weak non-conference schedule, Cael, if he's ever asked about this, and maybe we do it media availability, right? And say, what are your thoughts on the non-conference schedule? I don't want to try to insult it, but say, what are your thoughts on it? And if he says, well, the Big Ten Conference throws a lot of tough opponents, so why should we do that? James Franklin says that about the current day of college football. It's the same case here in wrestling.
Yeah, and I think if you were going to make an argument for scheduling tougher non-conference opponents in wrestling, it would be kind of to contrast it with football. It's like, well, if you somehow by whatever act of God lose, it really doesn't matter. You still have a chance to accomplish your main goals, which are winning at Big Tens and winning the national title. So by that logic, people would say, well, why not give the fans a show? But as you mentioned, Zach, on the other side, 10 ranked opponents. I mean, what do you want? 15 ranked opponents, 17? Like, what would be satisfactory at 10?
More, Joe, more.
Yeah. If Penn State basketball and Mike Rhodes were playing 10 ranked teams, which they very well could end up playing close to, because we all know how Big Ten basketball is. But if that's what the schedule looked like for Penn State basketball, that would be seen as a pretty challenging schedule. And I think Penn State's going to be tested. You got Iowa coming in. Not much more needs to be said there. You got to go to Ohio State and face Tom Ryan, which Ohio State's been giving Penn State. They gave Penn State a little trouble last season, if we remember correctly, and as in Nebraska, who are going to be going on the road. And Illinois, they haven't wrestled Illinois in a while. Illinois is a team that Penn State fans don't really think about too much because they only face them every so often. But Illinois is perennially very good, so they're going to get plenty of challenges. And I get why fans want to see that big mega duel in December that would have everybody excited. But the schedule is the way that it is, and I don't see, from Penn State's end of things, I don't see any reason to go crazy and change it anytime soon.
Well, and lest we forget, Joe, before we go to break here in a moment, don't forget about the NWCA All-Star Classic. That opens up the season, and that in itself, I know that all 10 starting Nittany Lion wrestlers aren't going to be here, but 7 of them in Rec Hall? I mean, that essentially in itself is the prime time. I mean, that's a glimpse into the future. Those are potential quarterfinal, semifinal. Obviously, everybody is going to immediately throw out championship, but I think you're almost guaranteed out of all of these 10 spots for the weight classes, you will see these matches once again come March 2025 in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and that's another thing, right? The big draw in wrestling is the individual matchups. It's an individual sport. Obviously, there's a team element to it, but the matches, they're 1 against 1, and you're going to be getting that, as you mentioned, November 16th in Rec Hall. And you're going to see a lot of really good stuff, like Levi Haynes against Rocco Welch. How's Levi going to do against one of the top guys at 174? We'll find out we'll get a glimpse into how healthy Shane Van Ness is when he takes on Ty Waters of West Virginia. And then obviously Carter Starachi going against a guy who probably would have won the Hodge Trophy last season if not for Aaron Brooks, and would have multiple national titles if not for Aaron Brooks. That's going to be the main draw too. But between the All-Star Classic, between the collegiate duels that Penn State's in, between going to Lehigh, I think there's plenty of food on the table for Penn State fans to kind of digest and tide them over until the main course of Big Ten season comes up.
Let's take a look further at this Penn State wrestling schedule, because we rattled off, again, Iowa, Illinois, Ohio State, Michigan. There are a lot of tough matchups. Which ones are the best ones? Let's go through them, rank them from, best to, least entertaining. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Now, coming up next, we still got to discuss some of those tough conference opponents, including, is Iowa even the toughest dual meet that Penn State has on the schedule? We'll tell you who could be that best opponent coming up next here. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You're going to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier than before. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to only show you incredible deals on incredible seats, and then you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. Now let's look at some Penn State football tickets. They're going on the road against Wisconsin if you're making the trip out there, or if you're a Penn State fan in the Wisconsin area. Game Time has all the best deals right in front of me here with the Game Time Picks. There's a super deal, all in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout. $127 per ticket in section FF, row 15. That's upper deck sideline. If you're just looking for the lowest price, you can sit in section KK, row 14, upper deck sideline as well. $102 a piece, all in pricing. You take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That is promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Joe, everybody's going to look at that Penn State versus Iowa matchup. It's 1 versus 2. But it's a home dual meet. It's the Bryce Jordan Center dual meet, one of the two. Actually, Michigan is the second one. I think it's also going to be that whiteout dual meet. But I look at Iowa, they made a lot of wholesale changes in the transfer portal. They basically sold out on the future, the structure, the foundation of the program to really go all in on this season. And I say what for? Because Penn State's going to win the Big Ten championship. Penn State's going to win the NCAA championship as a team. They are going to go undefeated. I think it is a little strange that you're trying to chase second place, go all in on second place now. I digress from that because Iowa might not even be Penn State's toughest opponent on the schedule. You and I are kind of on the same page here that Nebraska, as that preseason number 3 team, could pose a bigger challenge to Penn State than the Hawkeyes.
For sure, Zach, and you just got to look at what happened last year, right? Penn State went up to Iowa on a Friday night and won 29-6, and hosted Nebraska at Rec Hall on a Sunday, and Nebraska kind of gave it to them. Nebraska was leading at the intermission and ended up, I think it wasn't until the heavyweight match with Greg Kirkfleet that Penn State finally sealed the deal. It wasn't like Penn State was on heavy and upset alert where everybody in Rec Hall was thinking, oh man, is this going to be how the streak ends? I don't think there was really a serious danger there, but relative to the rest of Penn State's opponents last season, I think Nebraska, in fact, I know Nebraska, you can just look at the scores. Nebraska came the closest to knocking Penn State off.
They did.
And yeah, you mentioned that Iowa has done a lot to kind of, as you said, go all in for this season. But
why?
Aside from losing Aaron Brooks, which is kind of a big deal, 4-time national champion Hodge winner,
yeah.
Penn State isn't really significantly worse anywhere, and I think they're better in a few areas, and I don't think Iowa has any advantage against Penn State that they didn't have last season. And obviously with Iowa now having to go to the Bryce Jordan Center and what's going to be a hostile environment, and on the flip side with Penn State having to make the trip to Nebraska, and a Nebraska team that you still got Antrell Taylor, Rich Lovett, Brock Hardy, you still return a lot of key pieces to the team that came the closest to knocking off Penn State last season. So, I don't think Penn State's going to have too big a problem in either dual meet, but I think Nebraska is going to be the bigger challenge.
Okay, and what about Ohio State here? Because this is a team that when you wrestle them later in the season, you're going to actually get a bigger challenge. Because this is a young team. This is a team that's gone through a rebuild, those growing pains of having inexperienced college wrestlers. So everybody's going to look to Penn State and Iowa as that headliner matchup. You and I are talking about Nebraska, but I just, for the life of me, cannot look past this Ohio State team and say, oh, they're just another top 10 team. I think this is a team that absolutely can be in the conversation to be that second place team, that the coveted runner-up spot at the NCAA championships.
Yep. And again, referencing last season, Ohio State, if that takedown is ruled correctly, they get 3 more points in that opening match between Vinny Calcari and Brian Davis. Bo Bartlett and Jesse Mendez, the one that Bo Bartlett won, that ended up going to sudden victory. And there were a few other bouts that were pretty closely contested as well. And Ohio State, I think it was definitely closer than that final score indicated, I recall. But yeah, as you mentioned, a young team is going to get better later in the season. I also think Penn State gets better later in the season. But still, you're going against a team that should be at least in the top 10, if not the top 5 on the road. That's going to be pretty difficult as well. And I don't know. I would say Ohio State and Nebraska might pose a bigger threat than Iowa. I'm not as bullish on Ohio State as I am Nebraska.
Okay.
But I would listen to an argument that Iowa, even though it's very well could be a 1 versus 2 matchup, might actually be the third toughest team on Penn State's schedule, which tells you a lot about the Big Ten.
Yeah, it does. And don't forget, Michigan, Illinois, those could end up being top 10 teams as well. So it makes sense why Penn State they don't need to go all in on the non-conference schedule. You wrestle in Missouri, you wrestle in Arkansas, Little Rock at the Journeyman Duels. I mean, heck, Army's ranked as well, and that's at the Black Knight. That's another invitational type of, dual meet day. But Penn State really does have an entertaining and an interesting schedule, despite what the naysayers might say that, they're avoiding a non-conference slate. And Joe, I've already kind of dished out my thoughts on it, but Oklahoma State missing from this schedule is not an intentional, it's a disservice because I think eventually we deserve a Penn State versus Oklahoma State matchup. That should have been the Beaver Stadium duel, and we're not getting either of those in 24-25. And I chalk it up to timing. Stadium renovations at Beaver Stadium. You got to put together a contingency plan. David Taylor didn't get to Stillwater until May, right? That happened all so quickly after the Olympic trials. It's not like he made that decision in the last off season. In a year's time, if this isn't put together, a Penn State versus Oklahoma State season opener, and it doesn't even have to be in Beaver Stadium, as long as it's put together, that's great in my book. But if this doesn't happen in a year, that's when I'm kind of upset, disappointed that, why are you missing out on this opportunity?
Yeah, and it's something college wrestling fans deserve, honestly. And we all get Cael's reasoning for generally not going too crazy in the non-conference because, as we've talked about, 10 ranked opponents. What more do you need? Yeah. But it's just it's really kind of optics 101, right? You got the most historically successful program in college wrestling history in Oklahoma State, and you got the most successful program currently in Penn State, and that's even without the Cael Sanderson, David Taylor, Penn State connection. It would be something college wrestling fans, want to see. But with that connection, it just makes it a no-brainer. And I respect that it's real easy to say that this should be thrown together while we're sitting here and not having to run a college wrestling program. But at the same time, I feel like if both parties want to get this done, it would get done if they really wanted it to. The vibe I got from talking with David Taylor in the one-on-one I had a few months ago is that he would want to have it happen one day. He didn't say anything eye-popping let's make it happen. We'll go against anybody. It wasn't anything, big headline worthy like that. But he didn't rule it out either. I feel that if Cael is asked about it at some point, whenever we have him before the season, he'll probably be a lot more politically correct in his answer, kind of dance around it a little more. But yeah, if the two parties want to make it happen, it'll happen. And it would be kind of a diversion for how Penn State usually does things in non-conference, but it's just the fans of college wrestling and honestly the student athletes deserve it.
I think you bring up a lot of good points that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Timing is everything. Beaver Stadium renovations. David Taylor hasn't been in Oklahoma State for the longest time. The schedule is already in the works. It's already being made, and Penn State doesn't. They can't just add Oklahoma State and kick somebody else out. And they also don't have a lot of open slots to begin with when they figure out who they're going to wrestle week in, week out. And again, you still have to account for the Big Ten conference slate that you do have a mandatory obligation to. I like it. I think it will create a lot of fireworks. I think Penn State can set history, can reach an accolade and beat Iowa's record of that outdoor dual meet at the football stadium they had, a decade plus ago. Penn State, I think, could easily see north of 60,000 attendees for that Penn State hypothetical. Anybody, if it was Penn State, Iowa, Penn State, Oklahoma State, which I would prefer, either one of those, if you get a Beaver Stadium duel, you're getting at least 60,000 in attendance.
Yeah, and it's just so hard because to have the Beaver Stadium duel, obviously the season starts in November, and
you'd have to have it. Yeah,
you can play a football game in bad weather. A wrestling duel, no. That's going to be a little bit tough. And Iowa, we obviously know it can be done because Iowa did pull it off. But regardless of Beaver Stadium and the challenges of putting it together, I think whether it's at the Bryce Jordan Center, Rec Hall, Stillwater, wherever, this is something that I think has to get done at some point. Whether or not it will get done, I really don't know. But it's college wrestling. I don't know if college wrestling needs it. But it's a match that would, I think, attract the attention of even people that don't follow wrestling on a consistent basis.
We'll finish up the show and deviate away from the schedule a little bit because there is a bit of a rumor circulating that Penn State could have a different option with Levi Haynes being the guy at 174 and no red shirt. What would happen at 157? Now let's deviate away from the schedule a little bit because there's been an interesting conversation brewing. Now that Levi Haynes seems to be the guy at 174 where Alex Facundo was presumably supposed to be. Well, where does Alex Facundo go in this case? 165 is Mitchell Messenbrink. Could Facundo end up wrestling at an even lower weight class? We'll discuss the possibility of that on the other side of this break. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out all the latest stats, you view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. So it's a convenient, simple setup that can all be done in one location. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all it takes. A $5 bet to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's over at FanDuel.com. And if you look over at FanDuel, no, the lines are not out yet for Penn State versus Wisconsin, but you can make other bets on Penn State football, like to win the Big Ten Conference, plus 360. And if you think they win the college football playoff championship game, plus 1,200 to win the championship game. If you like those lines, you can bet them all right now over at FanDuel. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So the indication is that Alex Facundo would cut down to 157. He was recruited at 165, and we've seen him wrestle at what is the equivalent of 163 at the Olympic trials. He wrestled up and competed at what is the equivalent around 174 pounds when he did win Pan Am gold. I mean, Alex Facundo could wrestle at whatever weight class is needed. I think 157 is a pretty stark cut given where he is. I mean, Levi Haynes can't really do it anymore. What's to say that Alex Facundo is able to make that cut? But now that's the idea, that Facundo takes over at 157, and that displaces Tyler Casack, who, yes, can redshirt. Wouldn't be a bad idea to redshirt him as well, but he had such a good run at 149 to finish up the postseason, ended up taking third place, bronze medal after winning 7 matches in a row, and he's listed as the competitor at 157 for the NWCA All-Star Classic. And now I know this officially. You cannot do the red, unless you're a freshman, you cannot wrestle 5 matches and preserve your red shirt. If you are past your freshman season, once you wrestle, you're in it. You're in it for the long run. So Tyler Casack, if he's going to wrestle, this really complicates things, Joe, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Because obviously, Shane Van Ness is your guy at 149. I don't think there's any
Right.
debate about that. So for Kasich to wrestle, he can't wrestle at the class he came in at, which was 141. You got Bo
No.
Bartlett there. So 157 really is the only option. You can't go down to 133 because you have two guys that are capable of starting, and Aaron Nagao and Braden Davis. So 157, I think, is the best bet for him. It would be hard because this was a guy that was already wrestling heavy at 149, right? And now he
Hmm.
would have to go up even an extra class. He is ranked in Intermat's rankings. How much of Intermat's rankings are based on guesses versus inside information,
Sure.
I really don't know. So I don't know what that means. But from the sounds of it, and I have nothing concrete here reporting wise, nothing I could really write on Nittany Sports now, but just from what's been circulating from who we follow on the internet, it does sound like Alex Facundo is the guy at 157, and I thought that it would have made sense to have Mitchell Messenbrink move down to 157 because as good as he was at 165, it's kind of easy to see a guy built like Messenbrink to cut weight a
Hmm.
little bit. So I thought that might make sense, but it's definitely sounding like it's going to be one of Alex Facundo or Tyler Kasich. And from what's been circulating, it sounds like it's going to be Facundo. And this is a guy that it's really hard to keep out of the lineup, Zach, because
Yeah.
obviously this is a guy that already redshirted a year, which I'm sure wasn't an easy thing to do when you've already made it to NCAAs and placed 12th, almost close-ish to being an All-American, and then you have to redshirt a season while your teammates have one of the greatest years in NCAA history. That couldn't have been easy, and
Yeah.
he obviously it paid dividends in the freestyle world because he beat Levi Haynes, shut out Levi Haynes, and looked really good doing it at the Olympic
Hmm.
trials. So, how do you keep a guy like that out of the lineup? It's really hard, and it's really hard for Tyler Kasich to be kept out of the lineup too. But at the same time, Facundo's an older guy than Kasich. He's a veteran guy, and there's a sense of loyalty that comes from being a veteran. And we know Tyler Kasich's going to have his chance eventually, right? He'll have 3 years of eligibility if he does redshirt, which we
Right.
don't know yet. But yeah, it's definitely sounding like Alex Facundo is going to be the guy at 157. And this is a dude that I think is pretty underrated and a guy that I think could quietly become one of the top guys at whatever weight class he's at.
And that's what's interesting because I feel like I can put a lot of metaphors to this, Joe. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're doomed if you do and doomed if you don't in Penn State's case because Levi Haynes is going to be back. Mitchell Messenbrink is going to be back. Alex Facundo still has multiple years of eligibility. So does Shane Van Ness. The guys that are leaving are Carter Starachi and Greg Kirkfleet and Bo Bartlett. Okay. So it's not like Penn State is going to lose a lot of its middle weights and upper weights. Like these guys are all back. So these spots aren't going to get vacated. So if you have Facundo wrestle this season and say no to Kasich, what happens when Kasich comes back? I don't know how much again, because one way or another, somebody's missing out. Somebody is losing out. And you still have all those incredible guys down and around. Josh Barr is not meant to wrestle at 197, but because Carter Starachi's in at 184 this season, that's where Barr is. Barr's going to want to go back to 184. So do you bump Levi Haynes up to 184? Do you eventually have Facundo move up to 174 in a year's time, or Mitchell Messenbrink? Then you bring Kasich back, right? There's such a logjam, and then you can't neglect Connor Mirasola. You can't neglect Zach Ryder. All these other guys that are there, and you don't want to push them into the portal. Penn State would never do that. Penn State would never, and I'm not trying to imply it another way. You don't want to see an opportunity where they end up in the portal because they're like, look, I want to compete for championships. I know I can develop here, but there's too much going on when there's only 10 spots. It's not like football where you have playing time. There's a starter and there's a backup, and you can't sub out in the middle of the match. We all know this. Penn State's just really in a tough situation. I don't. The wrestle off kind of decides itself if that's the way they want to approach it. If Alex Facundo defeats Tyler Casack in a hypothetical wrestle off there, you give it to whoever, or if you're giving it based on seniority, and because Casack does have the red shirt option, again, I don't know what the right move is. I'm kind of at a loss for what you ultimately do in this situation because I know how good Facundo is. He was one of the top recruits in the nation when he was coming out of high school, and he took the Olympic red shirt, and everybody just kind of forgot about him. He can easily contend for gold in the NCAAs at whatever respective weight class, as you said.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, like, what does that do with Casack if he has the red shirt and then he's ready to come back and Facundo's still there? But that's next year's problem. I think
That's what I mean. You're kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, I think Penn State's Cael's just got to focus on what's needed for this season, and I think the most logical thing because. Obviously, I think it was Jim Tressel who said on that ESPN documentary, Youngstown Boys, he said that basically if there's a tie, the veteran is going to get the preference. And I think most coaches see things that way. And can we say that Tyler Casack is better than Alex Facundo? I don't know if we can say that. I don't know if we can say that Facundo is better than Casack, right? Both of them really haven't had to prove themselves at 157. Both of them would be going down, both of them would be moving pretty significantly, right? Facundo is a guy that was already wrestling heavy at 165. Him going down to 157, how would that work? Casack came at 141, him going up to 157.
Right.
How would that work? Who knows? I don't think there's really a definitive right answer as to who would be better at 157, but when there's something like that, you're probably going to go with the veteran, and you're probably going to be going with the guy that doesn't have the option to redshirt, and that's Facundo. What that does for 2025-26, who knows? But for this season, the task at hand, I personally cannot see a scenario where Facundo is, not in the starting lineup, and I think the best place for him to be in the lineup would be, based on everybody else, would be at 157.
We know what the perfect Penn State wrestling, this is where we'll wrap up. We know that the perfect wrestling lineup has Messenbrink at 57, Facundo at 65, and Haynes at 74. However, there's just not an easy answer to this. If I'm Messenbrink, I don't want to cut to 57, especially when I was just an overtime period away from coming from behind and defeating a David Carr and winning my first gold medal at 165. Why would you want to cut and move to a weight class where it's just not a challenge for you, especially after meeting, speaking to Messenbrink at those press conferences and media availability opportunities, that he wants as many challenges that you can throw at him, and I don't think he looks at 57 as a challenge in that case. So we know how one way or another, Penn State wrestling really has some bold decisions to make at the end of the day, and one of them could be coming sooner rather than later. Facundo wrestling at 57 and Casack taking the red shirt. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section about the schedule, the toughest opponents, and what Penn State should do at 57. He is Joe Smeltzer, Nittany Sports Now beat reporter for football, men's basketball, and wrestling when it comes to Penn State. His work will be linked down in the description. Joe, thanks so much for the time as always, and we are so close to wrestling season actually being here, so it's great to chat it up again about Penn State wrestling.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Zach.